and I know the more that I get involved in recovery, the easier my life becomes. And
Mm.
so even right now, while stuff is like quite challenging with, what's going to happen next and finances, I excuse me, am still
Bless you.
not upping my recovery as much as I ought to. So it's funny. But again, at the end of the day, like there's no wrong way to stay sober as long as you stay sober.
Right. And it's
But
just stringing that consistency. Yeah.
that's it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
again, there's certain things that I know I actually want to improve. And then of course I blame it on my partner and I say, oh, well, if there wasn't my husband or, it's my dogs. My dogs are constantly, when they're around or I'm in Australia, it's like, they got to get up and go outside or so it's easy for me to blame it on something else. So yeah, it's a working out is probably the biggest thing that's kept me sober and it's the biggest is most constant in my life. Because I will always make sure I have time for that. And I work out 5 to 6 days a week. And outside of that, like I know meditation is the number one thing that I need to incorporate and will make a huge difference.
Yeah. How many hours a day do you work out 5 to 6 days a week? Or you just do like that hour class and you're good?
Yeah, about an hour. So
Wow.
my program, my app is the program that I'm doing is like a dual split. So like, hamstrings and chest or quads and shoulders. It's, historically like, working opposing groups like back and biceps or chest and triceps, or leg day, like I've moved away from that and have developed a different style of programming that's working quite well. So I might do a bodybuilding show next year as a
Yeah.
master's, because I'm 40 now, and a big part of that is showing women like, we do get better with age because that whole rhetoric of, women become less valuable as we age is garbage, is absolute garbage, So there's a lot of stigmas, a lot of belief systems, a lot of just stuff regurgitate that I want to rewrite the script on, So
I love that. And I
um,
hope you do because I know I just went
yeah.
through a lot of that because I turned 50 last year. And it's like
Yeah.
for me, I remember when so and so turned 50 and they seemed so old. And,
Yeah.
just what I was going through mentally for a year prior to it, it was like ridiculous. I was almost like mourning myself.
You're right.
And it was like, well, why is 50 so significant? My grandparents are 93 and they're still alive. So this is like only a halfway point. So we're already mourning our old age and it's like I'm only halfway there most likely. So but it is interesting how we as women, and I'm sure men go through it too, but we start to look at these big milestones as like terrible as opposed to like, let's celebrate that and say, look, you're in the best shape of your life at 50. Isn't that great? I'm like, no, I'm
Right.
not going to tell my age and then maybe nobody will know. I'm still in denial.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. It's process. It's a conscious decision and, it's a process to rewrite that because otherwise the committee, right, the voices in our head will tell us otherwise. And it's interesting. I've heard this statistic and then I reheard it again this last weekend. I went and did a personal development, actually it was emotional intelligence training, if you will, for
Mm.
4 days straight. And it was super powerful. And so much of the stuff was like straight out of recovery. You get in what you put in, or you get out what you put in, like all these types of principles and everything.
Yeah.
um, but was, talking about like we have 67,000 conversations with ourselves on a daily basis. And of those, well over half of them, if not three-quarters of them, are negative, as well as repetitive from the day before.
Mm.
So we're just sitting here repeating the same old garbage that's negative, and what kind of impact is that having on our well-being? So it's just interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, well, and I think that's just a big problem with everybody. Of course, I always tie it back to addicts and alcoholics, but I just think negative self-talk is like we just constantly doing ourselves in. And,
Yep.
I didn't even realize how much I did it till somebody pointed it out to me. Like, would you say that to your friend? Would you say that to a stranger? I'm like,
Right.
oh God, I would never say that to somebody else. They're like, why is that okay to say to yourself? Like,
Yeah.
And I just said this in the last podcast, but it is coming up for a reason. But it's amazing how much negative self-talk can just affect, our depression, our anxiety, our how much we do, how much we don't do. Just it's just like under there constantly. And so it's really important for us to turn those into positive thoughts.
Yeah,
And is
absolutely.
that like a practice that you work on personally or with other people?
Yeah, I mean, it's more so just building awareness. Like that's the, as I said earlier, without awareness of a problem, there's no problem to solve. And a majority of people are just in autopilot, where we think life is happening to us as opposed to us doing life. And it's like, no, the biggest thing I'm working on right now is remembering that we are more than likely living in a paradigm of quantum physics as opposed to Newtonian. I don't know if you'd say principles or Newtonian, I don't know what you'd call it. 'Cause, like Isaac Newton is cause and effect, whereas looking at quantum physics, that idea of entanglement, and I was trying to put it into perspective in a way that my brain could unpack it. Because I read Dr. Joe Dispenza has a book called, I think it's The Habit of Beating Yourself or The Habit of Breaking Up with Yourself. I can't remember what it is now, but it's essentially the same principles where, in this 3D world, we think, like I kick you in the shin and it hurts your shin, as opposed to I kick you in the shin and the whole planet feels it because we're all interconnected, and it's like you ever text somebody and they're like, oh, I was just going to text you. Or you think of somebody you went to school with in the 5th grade and then all of a sudden they pop up on your LinkedIn. They're like, hey, how you been? Angie, I haven't seen you in a while. And you're like, what? Like, how is that
Yeah,
possible?
yeah.
It's like, oh, well, we're all connected. It's like we've this whole idea of multiple dimensions, and it's like truly like the Matrix.
Yeah.
So to I do I haven't done it in a long time, but I'm a laughter yoga facilitator, and basically when we say laughter is the best medicine, I mean, it's really true. And your brain doesn't know the difference between simulated and real laughter. So when you're doing laughter yoga, it's not yoga as you would think of it. It's just the yoga is the only part of it that's yogi-ish is the breathing element of it. But you're literally like chanting ho ho ha ha ha, which is like simulated laughter, and then you're ha 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 pretending to laugh. But when you're in a group of adults and you incorporate childlike behavior, because you hop around on one leg,
Yeah.
or you do all this stupid stuff, at first your ego is like, oh my God, this is so dumb. These people are judging me. This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. I can't believe I'm doing this. But then bang, all of a sudden you make eye contact with somebody and you start laughing. And then that turns into this uncontrollable fit of laughter.
Yeah.
And that laughter, when I first did it, I had never experienced this ability to not have thoughts, right? Because I had a few meditation sessions, because I've tried to do transcendental meditation. I've paid all this money to do all these stupid courses and stuff, and nothing has ever stuck. But you know, there were a few, I almost would say orgasmic experiences, because you're like, oh my gosh, you just felt elated and so much joy from not having thoughts. And the
Yeah.
only other time I experienced that is in jujitsu, and you're trying not to die when you've got some 250-pound dude on top of you, and you're like, please keep your balls out of my face. But that in times like that, you don't think. And so this was the opportunity to not think, because you can't think when you're laughing.
Yeah.
And you also can't be depressed when you're laughing. It's scientifically impossible. So having these sessions where you're just laughing uncontrollable, and because once it starts, you just can't shut it off. I mean, I'd laugh so hard I'd get a migraine. But what I would think and how I would relate this to this idea of quantum physics is like, okay, your brain can't tell the difference between simulated and real laughter. It still dumps the endorphins and the, chemicals that are the exact opposite of, say, cortisol, which we dump when we're stressed, and that leads to bloating and belly fat, whatever.
Yeah.
So, how can I incorporate that into my life? So when I mentioned earlier, it was like this concept of be, do, have, as opposed to have, do, be.
Yeah.
So have, do, be is what advertisers understand. And they say, okay, if you have this Jeep, you're going to be doing, these loops through the mountains, and you're going to be smiling and the sun's going to be shining on you. and then you're going to be happy, as opposed to, okay, well, if I can be happy and imagine, create that happiness in my mind, then I will be doing this and then I will have that Jeep.
Yeah.
So it's kind of flipping it on its head and creating the environment ourselves in our internal environment, as opposed to saying, okay, I need this outside stimulus to make me happy, you
Mm.
know? So that's a quite an interesting thought, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and it's exactly the opposite. Hi. It's the exact opposite of addiction, where we have to have the drug in order to be ourselves. And so it's like really
Right.
cool to sort of, I mean, and it's a process to train ourselves on doing things in the other sequence. And that's where the lasting long-term benefits and feel good stuff happens, is if you can do it in the correct way, not the instantaneous social media, quick hit kind of way.
Right. Instant gratification. It's exactly right.
Yeah,
So,
it
yeah.
is a process though. Like, and all that
Yeah.
training and all the stuff. It's like we can have all this knowledge, but it's like putting it into play. Sometimes it's just not as always as immediate as we would like to see.
Oh, 100%. Taking it from your head to your heart, as stupid as that sounds. There's so many things you hear thrown around, and you're like, what does that even mean? Like self-love. It's like, well, what does that even mean? So what does that mean to take it from your head to the heart? Because it's like you conceptually understand it, but taking it to your heart means it goes into your being and you do it without having to think about it. Right? It's like the difference between walking up to the driving range and, grabbing your golf club and saying, okay, here's where I step. I got my right foot turned out 30 degrees, unlock your knees, elbow slightly bent, tight grip on the left, soft grip on the right, straight back. I'm in a hula hoop. You know what I'm saying? To then just
Yeah,
walking up to it and just swinging the ball and crushing it 300 yards. It's like you got to take that blueprint. You got to do it X amount of times before it becomes a part of your nature, part of your programming.
yeah,
Because it's like it can be up here and it's like, okay, I can conceptualize it and break it down step by step, but I still have to go through and bang, 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 bang versus just going up and doing it. So crossing over to that point, I think, is what is the most challenging. It's taking it from our head to our heart, and being able to just make it a part of our programming without having to think about it.
yeah. Well, and
So,
I love the part that you talked about, because I'm super interested in all this stuff too. Whereas your mind doesn't know the difference whether it actually happened or you're just like visioning it to happen and trying to get those things to mesh. Like, this is how, like, and we're around top producer entrepreneurs types all the time, and they're like, just visualize, and it's like,
right,
yeah, okay, so but and to do that, you have to do it as if you already have it, not like
right.
this is something I want. And for me, that's very difficult to marry those two things together as if I already have this, and
Yeah.
not just something it's on my vision board, and someday I hope I get that.
Yeah, it's challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there's so many layers. Luckily, I think we're in an era where there's just so much availability between classes and mentors and practical application that, if you want to go down that hole, there is a lot available. But getting it to marry with like reality, that's the challenge.
Yeah, that's another story.
Yeah. But if it was
Yep.
easy, everybody would be millionaires and living the perfect life. Like, it just wouldn't be life.
Exactly right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
So
So,
do you have any big plans on the horizon for this year? Big goals or big things happening?
yep. Like I mentioned earlier, this docuseries will probably be the biggest thing. I mean, I've been talking about recording my audiobook for 12 months,
Mm.
but actually getting the discipline to sit down and do that, I'll do this summer. And, my ultimate goal is to, I don't want to say the female Tony Robbins, because, I don't want to limit myself to anything, but I foresee myself as having auditoriums full of women and girls sharing my experience with what is considered beautiful in this muscle fetish industry, and then getting them to crush watermelons during the summer, and because it has become a symbol of female empowerment, because it's like, look, we have a pain threshold that's through the roof, and putting that watermelon up and touching your vajayjay and saying like, right, like the closer it is to your body, more power we can generate. And we're generally have bigger lower halves. Women generally speaking have bigger legs than men because we have wider hips for childbearing,
Mm.
and I know a lot of times it's like, oh, anyway, I'm not going to touch that right now.
No.